Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, nice to meet you. My name is Dina. Reminding you that we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the power of our testimony.
It's taken a while for it to really get started, and I think that part of the reason has just been, deciding we're going to do this, and because there's always things that get in the way, right?
Yeah. I used to see it that way a lot and then beat myself up and feel down on like I should get it together. But throughout this decade plus years of waiting and wanting and planning and starting and backing up, I've gotten to know like a little bit more of God's sovereignty and learning what it means that He is in control of everything.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm also learning through time that everything is, these things happen for a reason. We feel called by God.
Yeah.
But the call doesn't necessarily match our timeline, but His.
Wow.
And there was a lot for us to live and a lot of stones for us to like trip over, to learn to have Him pick us up, to then come and give something that's genuine and not that syndrome of I'm a perfect parent pre-kids and I'm the perfect wife pre-husband kind of thing, which is in my case where I was.
Yeah. Unpack that a little bit. Perfect wife pre-husband, perfect parent pre-kid. What does that mean? Like, by the way, you decided to just go all in on the first interaction. You're just 100%. We're going.
I have one mode, not two. I'm a sleeping zombie or I'm full on. So I'm awake. I'm full on.
So what does it mean that you're the perfect parent pre-kids and then the perfect wife pre-husband?
I've always loved kids. I've always been around kids, and it was so easy for me to know exactly what every mom needed to do,
right,
and what every father needed to do to get those kids to behave. I was in childcare for a very long time, pre even getting married. When we were dating, I had a daycare. And there's this phenomenon where your kids are brilliant and perfect and so amazing and well-behaved when they're not with you. So I just couldn't understand why the parents of the kids that were so well-behaved in my daycare would ever complain about their children.
Yeah.
And
these
so
sweet
I thought,
little angels.
Yeah, they're sweet
perfect.
angels. They were perfect. They were. Like, it was time to sleep, they just slept. It was time to eat, they just ate. And so that got me very prideful. Like, it's because I know how to deal with the kids. I have the magic touch when it comes to kids. And if parents would just listen to me.
Yeah.
And then I became a mom and didn't sleep for a whole year. And, the baby expert couldn't console her own baby. And yeah, Mala came into this world as God's little angel, bringing the judgment I needed to hear. To knock me down a peg or two and introduce me to actual parenting and the grace and love and work that goes with it. And
So being in it is different than just
part-time.
Looking at it from the outside and, having an opinion on it. Yeah. And we definitely want to approach the podcast from the perspective of people who are in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you? Were you a perfect dad before kids, or was that just me?
Yeah. So 100%. I still am I was a perfect dad. I knew I'd always react the right way. I'd always have the energy to go play catch and to go play sports. I would never gain any weight at all. In fact, what's funny, I was recently remembering a conversation I had with my mom. I had come back from a run. This is me in high school. I come back from a run and I was just banging out some push-ups in the kitchen and I'm over here like, going for it. And she comes up to me and she's like, "Oh, wow, you're exercising. That's so good." And I'm like, "Of course I'm exercising. That's what I do." And she's like, she's like, "You should remember to keep doing that once you're a grown-up." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? That's just what I do. Like, that's who I am. I'm an athlete. I'm always gonna work out." I said, and I literally said this to her. I said, I see guys like me that used to be athletes or whatever it is, and then they get older and then they get overweight. I was like, that's never gonna happen to me. And it's true. It never did happen. No, I'm kidding.
But let's add that to the list of perfection. It's incredible to me how true it is that when I was a teen, I thought I knew it all. I didn't pretend.
Yeah.
I thought I knew better than everybody walking and breathing, Old people, people my age now, just didn't know enough. They just weren't smart enough.
Yeah.
Boy.
Yeah. Old people were 20s, like really old people were 30-year-olds.
Oh my gosh. And then 40s, it's like, why are we bothering? They're about to leave the world. And look at us now. Look at us now.
Look at us now. So
40 never looked so good.
yeah. Yeah. So definitely at that time, and pre-kids, I thought that I'd just be the perfect father that always had the energy, that always stayed fit, that always had patience. I swore that I'd be the absolute best husband and my wife would never have anything to complain about with regards to me or...
Does she? Where is she?
I
So I
don't know.
can slap her around.
We got to ask her. So I thought I would be, and then I got in it, and it's kind of like the Mike Tyson quote that I used at a wedding one time. That
romantic.
It was very romantic to use a Mike Tyson
yes.
quote at a wedding. I'm performing the wedding for this couple, and I said to them, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face, and that's what happened. I had a plan about the kind of father I would be. I had a plan of the kind of husband that I would be, and a kind of plan,
the Christian,
the kind of pastor. Before I actually got in front of a church, I had a plan of the kind of pastor I would be, and then I got punched in the face.
So that's what this podcast is about. What do you do when you get punched in the face?
The Punch in the Face podcast is brought to you.
Do you dig in your heels and you try to make it as everything is perfect, everything is fine? Do you admit defeat? Do you course correct? Do you go to God? Do you run away? Do you just give up and like, oh, well, this is just life? And what kind of person are you? Because we're figuring out what kind of person we are in different kinds of... in all the different facets, right? Because I may be a giving up kind of person in one part, but digging my heels in another one. Mm-hmm. We're learning. And we want to share what we're learning with you.
Yeah. And this is our journey. This is the road that we're walking and that we're currently walking through, believing that in Christ, we can do everything that is presented to us, knowing that God will have the answer to face the situation that we're in, and haven't always gotten it right, but we're striving.
Yes.
Pressing towards the goal.
Yes. How do we get to here? I think.
Yeah.
It's what we're going to talk about today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the podcast it stemmed from when I was invited a lot to go speak to churches, and I had that privilege and that opportunity. But in my heart, I had seen that God had given you that gift, the gift of speaking as well. And I wanted you to speak in public, right? And at the different churches, and I wanted you to also get invited. And so I remember that one of the issues, the challenges that we had was you were like, I want to do that, but I can't do that, right? I can't do that. And so we got invited to speak at we got invited to do the talk at a school, because I was constantly getting invited to do the talk at these like Christian schools.
Ooh,
and
the
so
relationship talk.
The relationship talk. Yeah. The talk. Yeah. And so they invited us to that school and we both went. And then it was just natural. It was just so smooth. You spoke, I spoke, we got we got the points across. We helped the kids out. At the end of it, the girls came to you and they talked to you about their struggles and their challenges. The boys came to me and they talked to me about their struggles and challenges. And it flowed so perfectly. And I believe that at the time, God put in my heart, like, that's it. Like, that's where this is going. Yeah. Where it wouldn't just be me speaking, but it would be us. It would be something that we would be doing together. And so the podcast became a natural outspring of that, where we could do something together. We have great conversations, and it's what God was leading us to do this in public with people, together. So I knew that I wanted to do a podcast and that I wanted to do video because that's where the world was going. This is back in 2011. So, the world was just becoming more and more video centric and video focused. Mind you, this is 2024. So there was a long,
Telling you,
there's a
my math is
long
on it.
road.
Decade plus.
Yeah. To get to this first episode. And I think that God made it so, because we weren't ready back then.
Yep.
We thought we were ready.
Because we knew it all. Okay. We were ready to tell everybody who was married how to be married when we had 3 weeks under our belts.
I remember that.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we went to a marriage retreat when we were newlyweds.
3 weeks. Like we won the award for youngest couple there.
Yeah.
And like all the breakout sessions, we were like, what is wrong with these people?
I was
Who is
23.
so angry at their spouses? And we were just like,
We hadn't had a fight at that point.
No,
like we
we
hadn't
were-
had a fight. We hadn't had like a major discussion or anything like that.
it's like, side note, I'm going to say this, and I believe it. It is hard and it is sometimes annoying. It could be annoying and it could be cute. It depends where you are at in your marriage when you see a new couple and they're all like, huggy duck and lovey
Lovey-dovey,
dovey.
yeah.
Okay. Refrain from telling people who are happy and in love, oh, wait, discounting their love and discounting their relationship, which is all we heard. And that's, I think, why we were so reluctant to hear wisdom in anybody around us, because all their wisdom and, in air quotes, wisdom was to trash marriage. And I wasn't ready to give up on having a happy marriage, because every couple that was around us that would talk to us most though,
Yeah,
would
I'd
tell
say-
us how terrible it was going to be and how soon I wouldn't want to be with my husband. And, if I turned down, if we were very busy and there was a time to go out with the girls, I would turn that down because I want to spend this night with my husband. And, that would be, oh yeah, whatever. Oh, that's now because you're in love. Now I'm like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But there are some, like maybe a handful of couples throughout the years that God always puts like a little strawberry along the path to be like, you see, look at them. They're happy. They actually want to be with each other. They actually enjoy each other's company. Strive for that, not the vast majority of the couples that were coming to us. I'm not saying all the couples that we met,
Yeah.
but the ones that were very vocal about it were the couples that perhaps weren't doing that good. And several of them are now divorced, So, just that, keep that up. And another one is when people get baptized, you get out of the water instead of a hug and welcome to the Christian family. And we're so happy. And I still want to cry every day. Today was baptism day at church. And I was by myself. I got there super early and I was there just like cheering on people that I don't even know that were getting baptized because it's so beautiful. But do you know what everybody says when you get baptized? Get ready, because now it's when temptation's going to come. Kind of like if we don't know that Jesus is your savior and he's big and he's enough and he's strong and it's up to him, that doesn't matter. What matters is that now you're going to meet the devil. Now is when he's going to come and take you out.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, what is that? What is that? What do you take the best day and you just turn it into something so negative? And it's not saying that the Christian walk is a walk in the park.
Right.
It's actually a walk through the valley of the shadow of death. But
Right, in
you
some occasions,
fear
sure.
no evil because of who's with you, right? So if
Yeah.
you have nothing nice to say, maybe don't burst people's bubbles before they even get the chance
Right.
to start walking that walk,
Yeah. And especially to a new believer, like what you want to do is you want to speak life into them.
Yes.
And I think that having a culture that is focused on that, understanding this person's new, I need to speak life into them. And if I'm not, then maybe that's something on me. Maybe that's something that I need to analyze, that I need to think about. I need to ask myself, why am I so miserable in this place? And really dig into that, because it's easy to become a nominal Christian and wear the traditions and the repetitive outward adornment of Christianity, right? To look the part, to look like a good Christian without actually embracing the gospel and embracing the love, peace, joy, patience, kindness that comes as part of the fruit of the Spirit when we are in communion with God. So, of course, if we're not having that experience, we're not going to be able to communicate that. And so creating a culture in your church that fosters people being loving, people being kind, and people giving people breathing life into others, especially newcomers.
And having that compassion, because if you are going to step out in this Christian walk and start walking and storming the gates of hell and doing all the things for God and the kingdom, but you're not hiding behind the cross, if you're not in Christ, it's going to be hard and it's going to be painful. And I'm not saying that from the outside looking at people struggling. It's because throughout this time, I have let go of God's hands, if you will. And I've tried to do his work and his mission on my own power, stamina, energy, wisdom, and you get, chewed up and spit out. And that'll be an episode for another day. What happens when that happens? Where do you go? Do you admit you're wrong? But in the midst of it, it's hard to see it as your thing, because like that's your problem. That's something that that you walked away. You were the sheep that strayed when you're in the middle of doing stuff for God, right? Sometimes that's hard to admit and see. And maybe that's where that bitterness came, because as much as it bothered me when I was a new believer, and it bothers me still, not that I'm mad at the person, but I'm like, ooh, I got to go and like say something good to that person and encourage them. I do feel compassion, because at some points I felt that way. I felt like, oh my gosh, this is going to be hard. But in those times, now looking back, I wasn't even seeking to be covered by God. I thought that I just had to do these things because that's what good Christians do. You just do the things, not knowing that it's supposed to be with what's within me, Holy Spirit in me, and working through me and protecting me and guiding me. That was supposed to be doing all the things, not for Dina in her infinite wisdom.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist, by the way. Being sarcastic.
Yeah.
Hi.
No.
It's my second language, third language.
Yeah. Man, that's, and it's so important, So this is the kind of stuff that we address in this podcast. We're going to talk about church, after, having pastored churches myself, having been the number 2 in churches, multiple countries, languages, denominations, and all kinds of things. And been on stages all over the place to bring the gospel and preach the gospel to all ages and all that. So helping people, just regular people, being as real as we can, teaching the word, and hopefully doing something that is going to bring light. That's it.
I like it.
I like it too. So, one of the main objectives here, we have a live audience with a baby, so he might start crying. One of our main objectives is to answer questions that people have. So this is the part where we want to hear from you and your questions, and get an idea of what it is that you would like to know, maybe about marriage, maybe about parenting, maybe about being a church member and, church culture that is sometimes very challenging. So if you do have questions, what we want is for you to just reach out with your questions so that we can address them in the show.
Or let you know, like, oh, we're still figuring that out. And maybe if we hit up any of those things, we can ask one of the wiser people listening, do you have experience with that? And we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah.
We're all in this together.
Yeah. So how did you get into being a Christian? Like, when did that happen? And why did that happen?
Well, it happened because one day in Calvary, God gave his life for us.
Yeah.
And that is true. But that's why we're all Christians. I was born into a Catholic in a home. I think we weren't always in church, but my grandma went to mass often, and she took us, and she would take us to do our catechism and all that stuff. And then when I was 4, my dad became a Christian, and he started taking me to his church. And so I would be going to both for some time in my childhood. I went to either Catholic school or Adventist school from kindergarten to 5th grade. And then I moved to the US. And then at that time, I think we weren't even like Christian and Easter goers. I remember going to mass maybe once or twice when I was little. And then my best friend in 6th grade got a crush on a boy that was in the choir in the church that was across the street from me. So she'd sleep over on Saturday nights to go with me to mass. So I think that's when I was a bit more consistent. And that was like it. Like, we knew of God. We knew God. We knew the Bible. I believed in God being God and all that since a very young age. And my dad did a very good job at reading the Bible to me, teaching me who God was, answering my questions with the Bible and not just watering it down, because I was a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old asking the questions. So I had a good idea of who God was, but that idea came mixed with the religion that my dad had presented, and they are very conservative. So the women are not allowed to wear makeup, wear jewelry, do their nails. Some extreme cases shave or wear anything but a skirt, and it was just very, very controlling. And I was like, I love God, but oh no, I'm not gonna be one of those crazy people. And then when when did that happen? When I was in 9th grade, I believe, 10th grade, 9th grade, the Twin Towers were hit with 2 planes. And to me, the world was ending. And everybody was saying that the world was ending. And I'm like, I know this because my dad taught me about persecution and Jesus is coming and I'm going to go to hell. And I was so scared that I called him and I was like, I need to start going to church. So at the time I lived in New York, he lived in Massachusetts. He came the very next weekend. We found a church where I found you, baby. And I started going there. I got baptized and I was all in. I was like, I don't care if I'm crazy. You know, all my world music CDs were in the garbage. My jewelry was given to my mom, and no makeup, no nothing. I was just like, I'm all this. I'm in because Jesus is coming soon, and you know, like, I'm going to heaven. I'm gonna do this. And I did that for about 2 years. Everything calmed down. No more planes flew into anything else. World War III didn't start. Things came down, and so did my faith, because it wasn't really faith to be with Jesus. I was just wanting to pay the ticket into heaven, right? I was gonna do all the things so I would be in the clouds with Jesus when he came. And so at 18, when there were things happening in my personal life, I left the church and didn't come back. I was busy during 5 years, you know, getting into trouble, getting into very negative relationship and messing myself up completely. And then my dad invited me to a Bible study, and I was like, I'm gonna shut him up and I'm gonna show up. And I showed up, and I was that very annoying small Bible study group member that would just like, I know the answers that I'm asking the questions to, and I know they could be either controversial or certain things that they're just not clear in the Bible, right? There's some mysteries because we are created beings. We can't just know every single thing about God. So I'll stick to those little points. And the person giving us Bible studies was so patient and kind, and he was doing great. But one night was the night where God touched my heart. He was like, you know, I want you. He just spoke to my heart. And that'll be details for another day. But in my heart, I wanted to say yes. It was finally when the gospel was presented to me. And although I grew up knowing about God, and although it was the same denomination, same church even, this person was teaching me who Christ was and what salvation by faith was and what it meant and all these things. It was a God that unlike any other that I had been presented, because up to that point, I'd been presented by the God that is keeping a tally mark on all your good and your bad. I'd been presented to the God that was waiting for me to mess up so he could take his holy, fly swatter and smash me down. I was presented to every other God but the God of the Bible. And I was like, I want that. Like, I've never felt that loved without having to perform. I never knew what that was. And I was overcome and overwhelmed by that love. But in my mind, I'm like, I know the situation that I'm in. There is absolutely no way that I can just walk away from everything. I've dug myself in way too deep. I can't do it. And I had also been introduced to the God that if you don't put him first, he would never, he's going to be insulted at the fact that you can't put him first. So in my heart, I prayed that night, if this is true, if you're a loving God, and if you could take me back, I will follow you. Like, for the rest of my life, I don't care what I have to do. I will follow you. But you know that I can't put you first right now. You would have to make that place in my heart. And that's all he needed. And that night I changed my address, my job, my everything. Like, my whole world got tipped upside down in a matter of hours. Everything that I thought was so impossible to possibly change got changed in a rather traumatic way, but it got changed that same night. And where that may sound bad or scary, what got me through into saying, now I'm a Christian. Now I walk with this God who loves me so much, that died for me, is because in my heart, I said, I can't put you first. I can't be the one to take the first step. And he took it for me. And he did the work for me. And then when it became hard, when the pain became excruciating, and there was lots of crying and stuff, afterwards, in the aftermath, he never left me alone. He was still with me. And so now I'm a Christian. Like, I can't explain it, because we all throw Christianity around, and I threw the word Christian around so much, but it wasn't until that night that I was like, oh, you are real, and you do care for me, and you love me. And it wasn't when I was going to church. It wasn't when I was a straight A student. It wasn't when I was doing good. It was when I was at my worst ever. And living a life that was 100% sinful, that you said, I'm going to reach in and I got you.
Wow.
And that's how I became a Christian. How about you?
Wow. That's amazing. We have to unpack that at some point.
We will. Another episode is long, and I talk a lot.
There'll be many. So I became a Christian after I had been pastoring for a while. And God pulled me out of being a church pastor. I became a Christian officially. So we'll get into that some other time.
Give a little more detail.
But no, I'd say that's when my true conversion, like, there were conversion points, because I don't think that conversion happens like all at once. I think that conversion happens over time, especially because that's my story. And that you reach certain conversion points in your life where things change forever. And that you can't go back to how things were. And, your life has that very, very poignant moment. And so I've had the biggest one for me happened after, like I mentioned. But I was born into a Christian family. I was born in another country. So in El Salvador, where I was born, we would regularly attend church. In fact, the pastor that baptized my mom baptized her while she was pregnant with me. So, and later on, I go on to find out, because I end up working with his son on several projects. We end up pastoring together in several occasions. And the pastor who baptized my mom's son became a pastor. And then I was also a pastor. We ended up working together. It was amazing. We didn't know. And so I was baptized in my mother's womb.
I love it.
So I was born into a scenario where they were both they had come back to church. They had left at some point, and they had come back to church, and they were attending regularly. My country was involved in a very violent and bloody civil war. And so we end up fleeing the country and seeking asylum in the U.S. And we eventually, after about 15 years of being here, we did get political asylum. So, but while here, my grandmother, who was also a Christian, made it a priority because she was the person that was in charge of bringing everybody from El Salvador to the States. And she worked hard for it. But one of her priorities, I interviewed her recently for a video that we did. And she told me one of her priorities was that they would know how to get to church. And she kept saying it that way. She was like, I wanted everyone to know the path to the church, how to get to the church.
Like figuratively,
Figuratively
or like
and
literally,
physically, like literally.
take this highway
Right.
and this exit.
Right. And so, but figuratively as well. And so at the time, all of the families were fragmented because of this, because of the migration, and everybody was trying to come back together. And so her idea was, if we're all Christians, we'll have a better chance in this new world, kind of thing. And so she was right about the whole thing. She was right about a lot of things that, that she's taught us. But she's the reason why I end up back in church, because when my parents do get to the States, they're no longer Christians, or no longer active, I'd say, participating Christians, right? My parents had that time of separation. Now they're back together. Things are a little awkward. And so they're not involved in church. And my dad had turned his back entirely to the whole thing. And so I start going to church again with my grandma. And so she's taking me on Wednesday nights. It was prayer meeting. And I loved going with her because it meant that I'd get to watch a movie. And, I grew up in a time where we didn't have TV readily accessible. So we couldn't just turn on Netflix and watch a show that we wanted. And so this particular church would put on these old Hanna-Barbera cartoons that were like these people that go explore, ancient Bible stories. They'd go through this portal that they found in Egypt or whatever it was. And they'd fall through this hole that would put them through a portal that would bring them to this story in the Bible. And so I loved it. I was obsessed with it. So anytime she'd say, hey, you want to come to church with me? I'd yes, right away. And in fact, at that church was when I started to get introduced to the idea that video was very important, because my uncle, ironically enough, you'll learn later on why ironically enough, but my uncle would record all the sermons that the pastor would preach. So he bought a really nice camera, and he set up a tripod at the church. The church didn't have video recording capabilities, and he set up a tripod in the church, and he would record every single sermon. And I remember asking him one time, because he's very, he had a lot of rules against like touching his device and touching his camera and all that stuff. And he was very thing about it. And so I asked him once, and I was like, why do you record the sermons? You were there, like you were there, and we all fell asleep. Why'd you record it? And he's like, because if I record it and I save the video, I can share it with other people and spread the gospel that way.
Wow.
And so that was his idea. He's like, I can make copies of this now. He's like,
So it's just in your DNA.
So apparently, right? So he would record the sermon, he'd copy the tapes, and then he'd share it with other people. And that was his big mission. Like he felt like that was what he could contribute to the church and what they were doing. And so from then on, I grew up in the church. I grew up going to church and participating in every single ministry that was available in the church. And eventually in my teens, I felt the calling to become a preacher, to become a pastor. At the time, I didn't know anything different. So becoming a preacher meant becoming a pastor. Spreading the gospel meant you have to be a church pastor. And so I did. I went to college and I studied in Puerto Rico. I got my bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry and in pastoral theology. And I went off to pastor churches. But it was very much going through the motions. Like I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And I hadn't really had an encounter with God. Not like that. Not to the point where I knew that it was just real. And so it was during a a teens camp that I began to feel this uncomfortableness within me. And I'm like, I don't just want to be a church pastor. Like, I don't just want to be managing the church and, are the tithes coming in and the church budget and let's have a board meeting to address the color of the carpet and all of this stuff that I felt was just so draining to me, when what I wanted to do was make sure the gospel reached the world, seeking the lost, turn them to Jesus. That's what I grew up with. And yeah, go ahead.
Not that being a pastor is just being a pastor, right? It's that it wasn't your calling. Let's put it out like that. Like, being a pastor and shepherding the sheep and making sure that the seats and the buildings and everything are taken, that is a gift, and it's an important and needed gift. I feel like because of where the church where you were, your gift is obviously evangelism. That's where your heart is, and they're not the same. And at the time, you didn't know that they weren't the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there wasn't a path for me other than specifically church pastor. And like you said, I do agree with that. There is a place for it, obviously. And people are nurtured. We were literally just talking about that this week, where, churches are places where people are nurtured and they grow in faith, and seeing other people who also believe what they believe is reinforcing, and hearing testimonies today, like we did today, rather, are just so encouraging and so uplifting. And so it's a huge thing, and being part of a church is good, and being part of a church is important. And definitely the pastors that are called to that is a very important ministry to do. I wasn't called to parish ministry specifically to lead a church, although that's what I thought, because I was the only path at the time. It was the only option. It's like, oh, you want to be a preacher? We got to be a pastor.
The only way to preach is to become a pastor,
right.
And so be a pastor.
Yeah. To be a church pastor specifically. Mm-hmm. There wasn't like, you could be a ministry, you could have a ministry, you could lead a ministry or whatever it is, or you could just be a preacher. And itinerant preachers weren't seen in a positive light. It was kind of like, oh, they're seen as,
in your denomination. Yeah.
Right. In the denomination I was in. So that kind of thing was, it was just, that was the path. So I went for it. But I'm at this teens retreat and I'm like, this isn't it. Like, this isn't it. And so I began to pray, and I began to pray very seriously to God that he would show me what it was that he wanted to do in my life. And then it wasn't for a year. I did that for a year, that I was praying. It wasn't until a year later that God brought on a whole cloud of circumstances that eventually led to me resigning my position as a church pastor and moving from New Jersey down to Florida. And I went from being in front of a church and being in front of thousands of people and speaking and doing all these different things and being admired, and to working at a mall as a maintenance guy, getting $15 an hour. And that was such an incredibly humbling experience. But on one of those occasions, which is what I referenced earlier, I was working overnight, which I hadn't done before. It was very challenging because I couldn't stay awake, physically stay awake, working weeks at a time overnight. And I was pressure washing. I was on top of this lift, pressure washing these awnings at this outdoor mall. And I was just crying, and I was just crying like, this isn't it, man. Like, you brought me out. You said this was the way to go. And there was a lot of movement that happened. Like, God spoke through dreams, and he spoke to us through people and scripture and so many things that ended up to us making the decision to leave. And it happened to you. And it was, to me, it was a collective thing. And so I was sure, it was that song that helped from Elevation. I know that it was your voice that I heard calling me out, right? And we stepped out, but here we were in the worst financial situation we had ever been, with kids and married, and just it was a struggle, it was absolute struggle. I thought that it would be, we would leave and then I would immediately,
The door will be wide open.
the door would be wide open and I'd have this, YouTube channel with millions of subscribers that were getting the gospel. And, I was able to preach and teach and go and travel and, be this itinerant speaker that was bringing the gospel to places and planting churches and in different locations and, all of this stuff. That's what I thought would happen as soon as I left. And yet when I left, I ended up I felt like I was abandoned and forgotten. And yeah, I think that's when I truly started to become a Christian, not because I wasn't a Christian before, or I didn't follow the principles before, but because the gospel started to penetrate my life and my heart in a way that it had never done before, where I truly believed that even though we were 3 months behind rent and had no way of paying it, that God would come through because he was good. And I had never faced a situation like that, but I was sure that he would. And he did. He did. And that was the amazing thing about it all. So, dramatic things aside, I tend to be dramatic, but, obviously I was a Christian. I was baptized when I was 11 years old and all of that stuff. But I consider that event a very life-changing moment in my life. Life-changing moment in my life. A very life-changing moment. And that event has permeated Christianity and the gospel into my being. So,
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
You know what's interesting to me about us giving our testimony? We've been giving our testimony for years. Is that at any given point of our lives, we would have been asked and we would have said, I'm a Christian.
Of course.
So Christianity is a walk, it's a journey, it's a relationship. It's life, it's doing life with God. And it's just beautiful to see that God meets you where you are every single different stage of your life. And I just feel like saying that because there may be somebody like I was when I was 18, that if my life didn't reflect, if my walk didn't reflect my idea of what church should be or what being a Christian should be, then that meant that I was done. It wasn't for me and I'm out. But through it all, like now saying, having that experience that was life-changing for me, you sharing your experience that was life-changing for you. What I would say is hold on for that moment. Hold on for that moment, for when you can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's nothing for you outside of being with Christ. It came to the disciples. They walked with Jesus literally in the flesh, and they learned from him, and they ate with him, and they slept with him, and they did their whole lives with him for 3 years. But it took some time for them to arrive at the point where Jesus asked them, do you guys believe in me? And for them to answer him and say, where would we go? Only you have the words of life. Just hold on for that. And when you put your foot in your mouth, and when you stumble and mess up, and when you realize, oh, the life I've been living up to now is not Christianity, or when you're leveling up in your walk with God and you start feeling that emptiness and that void, don't walk away. It's like the next batch coming up, like Peter. Peter loved Jesus. Peter walked with Jesus. Peter saw him do miracles. And it was after his death and his denial of Jesus that he came into the apostle, then he came to be the guy that that healed and did all these miracles without wavering, but he wavered quite a lot. And, I will even venture to say that maybe there was more mess ups that just weren't recorded because the canon was closed, right? It was not for us to know, but it's for us to know that leading to that point where you're like, oh yeah, we're going to be together because outside of you, life is not worth living anymore. Hold on for your moment because it's coming. If you haven't had it yet, it will come. And judging my life, looking back at it, I could say that there are going to be moments in the future where I'm going to have some encounters with things that I don't even know that I'm withholding from God, or things that I'm believing or misbelieving, that he will shine some light in when I'm ready and when he's ready to walk me through it. And then you'll talk to me in 10 more years and then in 20 more years. And I'll say, oh, and up to here, I thought this, and up to that, I thought that. And then God expanded on that. So just hold on. If you're ever feeling like, oh, this is not for me, or I'm not a real Christian, or I don't feel the thing, or whatever it is, or you don't have your big life-changing moment yet, just hold on because it's coming. He will give you what you need. Just go to him. Don't push him away when you need it and when you can take it and when he is ready to walk you through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's very good. I love it. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that that's very important to keep in mind. So I think we'll leave it here for today.
Yes, sir.